Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm trying to get over my camera shyness. I feel very awkward talking in front of a camera. That's one of the reasons I'm making this video. And this is going to be a short video. The other reason is I wanted to come on here and tell you a little bit about my thoughts about what I feel Dungeons and Dragons is. But I'm just going to read what I wrote. It's a preface. It's in my book. This is my book. It's called Forestera's Fate, Book 1, The Sacred Shrine and the Valley of Caves. And I wrote this book. I didn't initially write it to make money. Obviously, I would love to make money, but that's not why I wrote it. I wrote it for a lot of reasons. But I just wanted to read what I wrote as my preface and to tell you that if you would like to hear this story, for those of you who don't know, I've narrated the entire story on my channel. If you go to just click on playlists and click on the playlist called Forestera's Fate, and there you will hear me narrate the entire story one chapter at a time. The preface is in I think the second video. As the first video is an introduction where I give some background detail information like we're about to play D&D. But anyway, I wanted to read this and hopefully I can get some feedback from some of you. Do you agree or disagree with what I say here? So I'll just read it and I think I'll end the video there. The first time I played Dungeons and Dragons was 1980, freshman year in college, at a school called Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. So if anybody went to Luther College in Decorah, Iowa back in 1980, well, you probably wouldn't remember me anyway. I was only there for one semester before I got homesick and came home. Anyway, back to my preface. I knew nothing about the game other than what a couple people had told me about it, so I really didn't know what to expect. There were around 6 of us. We all rolled up a character, and then we just went adventuring. One guy was the game caller who would speak on behalf of the group. He would convey to the dungeon master, the guy who was running the game, what actions we would take as a group. We explored the land and ran into people and monsters on the road or in the wilderness. We found caves and explored them and found treasures, copper, silver, and gold coins, gems, jewelry, and other items like armor and weapons. And some of them were magical. We found a magic ring, a magic scroll, and more. And I remember this because the first time you play D&D, it can leave kind of an imprint on you. The game was basically exploring, interacting with people in towns. We did a little of that. Fighting monsters, finding treasures, all the while trying not to get killed. When you played D&D back in the day, one of your goals was to not die. That was one of the basic premises of the game. Let's see if nobody dies today. Let's see if we can all stay alive, which I think was what made D&D such a great game. We didn't stop playing until 3 a.m., and I went to bed that night with my dreams filled with magic, monsters, and treasures. I couldn't wait to play again. It was unlike any other game I had ever played, and the most amazing thing was that I knew none of the rules. The entire game took place in my imagination. I did roll up a character, and they had me roll dice, and I wrote it on a blank piece of paper. That's literally what our character sheets were, blank pieces of paper. We had pencil. We're all sitting around in our dorm room, and my roommate was the dungeon master, and he sat in the back area, and we're just on the floor. We didn't even roll dice. He rolled all the dice, which you could do as the dungeon master. It's actually in the DMG, in the first edition DMG. There's a section, I forget where it is, where Gary talks about the dungeon master has sole authority on what dice are rolled and when. Okay, back to this. A lot of people associate the game of D&D with rules. Today there are over 5 editions of D&D, and each of them is still played by some. Some players believe that different editions of the game are different games. I once saw a comment that said that basic D&D is a completely different game from AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I was going to reply, but chose not to, because it's just not worth arguing with people. But what some players don't seem to understand is that it's all D&D. Every edition of D&D, in my opinion, is just D&D with a different set of house rules. Another player commented that what I was doing in my game was a rules violation. This was on Facebook. This conversation happened. I knew then that I was dealing with what we call a rules lawyer. I was going to say that in D&D there's no such thing as a rules violation. But then it would have just evolved from there, because the moment you say that to a rules lawyer, they'd be like, what are you talking about? The rules are the game. That's how you play the game. You have to follow the rules. And if you deviate from rules with a rules lawyer, they will open the book and say, this is wrong. You're playing it wrong. It's unreal. But a lot of people feel this way. Back to my writing here. There is no such thing as a rules violation. But then it would have just evolved from there. So instead I said nothing. But D&D isn't about rules. It's about going adventuring. The rules that are used can vary in many ways, but the rules are just guidelines for playing the game. The game is what matters. And that game, according to me, from the way I see it, from the way I interpret D&D, is going adventuring. Use whatever rules you want. When I wrote this story, I tried my best to convey what D&D is to me. I wanted to capture that magic that I first experienced the first time I played, knowing none of the rules. I wanted to show that all D&D is, regardless of what rules you use, is going adventuring. So that's what this story is about. When I wrote it, it took me on an adventure. At times, the story seemed to take on a life of its own, and I ended up going down paths I hadn't even thought about at first. Ideas would just pop into my mind, so I followed them. The adventure ended up going differently than how I thought it would go, which very much surprised me. But I found myself loving where this story went. I know that sounds odd since I wrote it, but that's how it ended up feeling, not even halfway into the story. And I was surprised at how long this book ended up being. It's a bit long, and it's over 500 pages. But it's light reading, and it doesn't take as long to read as you'd think it would. I wasn't expecting the story to end up being this long. So I hope that reading it takes you on an adventure, and you enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it. Hopefully, I'll write book 2 and more. I can only imagine where those adventures will lead, though I have a few ideas. That is basically, in a nutshell, what D&D is to me. I'm not saying rules don't matter. If you don't have rules, you're going to just make things up on the fly, and that would be silly. Of course you have rules. But what if you enjoy playing, let's just say any edition, just pick one, 3rd, 4th, 5th, doesn't matter. If you enjoy playing that edition with the people you're playing with, what does it matter if, let's say you've always played 5th edition, and I'm just taking this as, I could say any edition, and now somebody said, hey, come over and play D&D with us. Oh, what edition are you playing? Oh, we're playing 4th or 3rd or 1st. And you've only played 5th. Like, oh, I don't know how to play that game. If the players understand the game like I do, what I would say to that person is, don't worry about the rules. Don't worry about that. We're going to go play, and we're playing this edition. Let's just come and play. And don't worry about the rules. Just enjoy the game. Just have fun. We're just going to go adventuring. It's fun. And that's the thing. When I played this game freshman year in college, I didn't know any of the rules at all. I didn't know, he would go roll for initiative. And I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And well, he's going to roll and tell us if we won the initiative, we attack first. Oh, okay. And everything took place in my imagination because we didn't have miniature figures. We didn't roll any dice. I'm just hearing the dungeon master, I'm hearing the game caller tell him what actions we're taking. We would speak up too individually for ourselves. We would say, I want to do this, or I'm saying this. But he would convey what the group did, and then the dungeon master would respond with, okay, this is what happens. And there were times when the game kind of bogged down at times, but that happens every time I've played D&D, because D&D is hard. It's hard to keep track of everything, especially for the dungeon master. And players can be difficult to deal with. You're dealing with one guy running a game, and he has to deal with all these different players and personalities, so it can get convoluted at times. But if everybody would just forget about, or stop worrying about what the rules say, and just focus on, you're a dwarf or an elf or a human, and you're traveling through a forest, or you're in a town, or you're in a dungeon. And when you encounter things, you react to those things. What should we do? Should we attack or should we flee? Should we hide? Should we approach these people and talk to them? Oh, this person looks shady. Oh, I'm going to stay away from that guy. You can play this game in any genre, any setting. It doesn't even have to be a fantasy, medieval style fantasy setting. You could play this game in the Wild West of the I don't know what year the Wild West was, whatever. It doesn't matter. You can play this game with guns. I've never done that, but people have. You can play in outer space. There are no limits to how D&D can be played. There are no limits to what can happen to your characters. Your characters could travel through time, could travel to a modern world or another planet. Again, those are the exceptions. The basic game is a medieval fantasy world. That's the setting. And it's swords and sorcery and magic. And there's no machine guns or cannons or technology. There's no electricity. But there can be, if the dungeon master wanted to do something different for a change. But for me, it's not that I'm not opposed to minifigs. We played with minifigs a lot. I'm not opposed to players rolling the dice. We almost always rolled the dice as players. But once I learned the rules of the game, there was a certain element of magic that I lost in this game, because when I was playing that first night, knowing none of the rules, the only thing I had was my imagination, and I saw everything in my mind. And the rules weren't in my way. I wasn't thinking about rules. I was just experiencing, we're in a forest and we're traveling and we're trying to find, we're hoping that we find monsters or whatever, caves. And when we would enter those caves, I saw us going into those caves and exploring with our torches so we could see. And it was just unlike anything I've ever played, because, a game takes place on a board. And D&D really does take place in your imagination. And the more creative the dungeon master is and the more cooperative the players are, the better the game's going to be for everybody involved, regardless of what edition you play. Now, I've only played first and second edition. I saw third edition. I did not like what I saw, and I refused to buy any of the books. Someone bought the book. I was looking at it. I'm like, what the heck am I reading here? It didn't resonate with me, because Wizards of the Coast tried to create an entirely different system. So I rejected it. I don't know how many people rejected it and how many people accepted it. Obviously, 5th edition is the most popular due to mostly marketing and things. And I've heard 5th edition is a great edition. I've also heard 5th edition is a horrible edition. But I've heard that about every edition. I've even heard people who like 4th, and 4th is the least popular. But I hear people who like and dislike 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 3.5, 4th, 5th, and basic. There are people who like it. There are people who hate it. I once saw a comment on Facebook that said every edition other than 1st is garbage. Okay? It's all opinions, and everyone's got one. So you need to find people that you can play with who don't care about things like that, or say, well, we're only playing first edition, so you think all the others are garbage. Well, doesn't matter. We're playing first edition, so you like this edition, or third or fifth or whatever. So for me, that's what D&D is. I'm curious. Do you see it differently? Because disagreeing doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right, or you're right and I'm wrong. If you have a different opinion about what Dungeons and Dragons is, feel free to share. But do constructive criticism. Don't lower yourself to negative, silly comments. I mean, if you do, that's fine. If that's what you want to do. I've done it in the past. I once called someone an idiot, and I'm like, why did I say that? It's so dumb of me to call someone else an idiot because I thought what they said was stupid. But if you think what I said is stupid and you want to call me an idiot, feel free. I mean, I think it's a mistake, but that's up to you. But what do you think? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm nuts? You'd be right about that regardless, because aren't we all nuts? I've never met somebody who isn't a little nuts. Never. Not one person. I think that's part of being human, but that's just my opinion too, obviously. Okay, I've rambled on enough. I'm totally not comfortable talking to a microphone, in a camera like this. I'm using my phone because I don't even have a webcam right now. Anyway, hopefully I'll get some feedback and we can maybe have a discussion sometime. And I hope you will give this a listen on my YouTube channel. I think if you are a fan of D&D, I think you'll love what I've written here. I think so. It's basically D&D in story form. See what you think of it and let me know. Take care.